Gordon, you've been critical of President Obama largely in how he's approached China, but you've also asked for a pretty strong approach to China. You've asked for a show of more strength. Is this something you think is good, then, the fact that we're moving military assets right up against their border?
Well, we have to do that because China is using forceful tactics of its own right now to try to take territory away from Japan, the Philippines. Eventually, they're going to use those same tactics against South Korea, and those three countries are our treaty allies. Plus, also, they're trying to encroach on Vietnam, India, the rest of Southeast Asia. And at some point, we got to do something, because this is starting to smell like the remilitarization of the Rhineland. And the idea is to stop the Chinese before anybody gets hurt.
And in terms of stopping it before anybody gets hurt, we've seen this rise of sort of this perennial limitless growth, being able to have this racial nationalism, all these sorts of things. And that's coming to a close, or the perception is that that's coming to a close. What is your confidence in terms of the ability of these new leaders to manage a soft landing on these things, or do you think that they're going to be facing some disruptive scenarios? Let's put it that way.
Certainly disruptive scenarios, because they've got an economy right now that is slumping. You know, it's growing maybe 1 or 2%. When you start looking at some of the underlying data, you have the military breaking free of civilian control, and you have the Chinese people who are now not afraid of the Communist Party. You put all that together, and it makes it very difficult for the new leaders, because not only do they have to deal with all of these challenges, they've got problems and infighting at the top of the Communist Party. So when the leadership is least able to deal with these issues are becoming bigger and bigger all the time, and they don't need President Clinton running around the... They don't need President Obama and the future President Clinton running around the region.
Hey, listen, you said the two things for us to watch for is whether or not Hu Jintao retains some leadership position within the military, and how many conservatives end up on the Politburo. Okay, so we're going to look for those two things over the next week or two. But give me how these two scenarios play out and how they affect America. What's the difference in those two scenarios for us?
Well, I think what happens is if you have, for instance, a divided civilian leadership, that means the military always becomes much more powerful in China. They're already using these really aggressive tactics against our allies and also against the United States, against us. And so I think that, if there is this continued struggle at the top of the Communist Party, then probably we're going to see a much more belligerent China. These guys are falling back on nationalism because they have to bolster their legitimacy. And whenever they do that, they cause troubles.
Well, what would they be willing to actually start a shooting war over, you think? And this is what I really want to... what's worth... And when I say that, it could be a limited engagement, could be a conflict just in one area, but what are sort of the... For that leadership, for the communist leadership now that's trying to sort of establish that it is still very much a control, where are they going to be willing to say, you know what, we're going to fight over that?
I don't think that so much that they're going to say, we're going to invade an island or whatever, but they're going to use tactics that are going to result in the deaths of others. And this has occurred. We've had South Korean Coast Guardmen die. We've had Vietnamese fishermen die. We had them attack a U.S. naval vessel in March of 2009 when they tried to sever a towed sonar array. That was a very dangerous incident. And what I'm worried about is not that they really go out to intend to start a war, but they do things that end up with people dying, and then you have the spiral downward. This has happened so many times in history, and we're seeing the same dynamics play out now.
So, Gordon, what can we be doing here and at home in the U.S., to try to manage this relationship? And I think even at something like the Keystone Pipeline, that by, putting the hold on that, we ended up sending the president of Canada over to China to send that oil, sell that oil to China, and strengthen that relationship. Are there things we can be doing domestically that kind of put China in a box a little bit instead of strengthening their relationships with our neighbors to the north?
Well, clearly the Keystone Pipeline is something that Prime Minister Harper has really focused in on and has told President Obama in private that this is a really make-or-break issue for Canada. And we've got to remember, Canada, we have a big common border with Canada. We don't want them being China's best friend. They're a NATO ally. We need to keep NATO strong. But, when we think about China, we also think about trade, the issues of currency manipulation. And right now, the United States has this enormous trade deficit with China. This gives us enormous leverage on our part to force China into better decisions. And we're not trying to do that. This administration hasn't done it. The previous one didn't do it. We need to start thinking about how to use our leverage.
I want to ask one question related to resource management. We've seen all across the world over the last several decades, China expand its reach by investing in various countries and in just about everything. Under the first first 4 years of President Obama's presidency, one of the things that I came back to again and again was how little pushback we saw from American industry and from the government against these things. Do you think that's going to change at all over the next 4 years?
Well, I think we will, because, Buck, you read Hong Lei's comment on the U.S.-China Economic Security Commission's report, which just came out a few hours ago. And that report said we need to look much more closely at all Chinese investments from state-owned enterprises into the U.S. because they don't have economic considerations. It's political.
Exactly.
And, these big enterprises are run on politics from the Communist Party top down. And so they're not like ordinary companies, that invest in the United States. These are companies that have a political agenda which could undermine our national security, and in some cases definitely does.